So, dear humans, welcome to our 211th online gathering for faith leaders across the country. We began with being church in 2020, then transitioned to courageous leadership in 2021. This year, we feel Spirit nudging us to shift again. So, nearly every Wednesday through 2025, we're planning to gather under the umbrella of creating beloved community. This regular event is sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jason O'Neill. I use any and all pronouns. I'm the operations manager for ELCA Coaching, and I am honored to be one of your facilitators today.
And I am Reverend Solveig Nelson Gooden, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am your other facilitator today. I'm so delighted to be able to be doing this with Jason. So, in attunement with the truth and healing movement of the ELCA and moving toward right relationship with our Indigenous siblings and neighbors, let us begin with a land acknowledgement. We are gathered from all parts of Turtle Island, also referred to as North America. And we are connected by technology, by faith, by a common sense of purpose, by the breath given us by the breath maker who has named and called us here, and by the very piece of Mother Earth, the land that each of us inhabits today. We understand the importance and necessity of our acknowledging the land and the original Indigenous peoples whose creation stories are rooted in these places and who have lived on and within and still live within these lands throughout Turtle Island since time immemorial. We also understand that all land is Indigenous land. And so we invite each of you to name in the chat the Indigenous peoples or tribal nations who were the first to love, pray, grow, celebrate, cry, drum, and sing upon the lands and places where you are located now. Feel free to just do that while we continue. We know that Indigenous peoples are not historical subjects, but part of our communities, churches, schools, and leadership, and that they offer valuable, invaluable wisdom for how we exist today and into the future in relationship with Mother Earth, as well as our human and non-human neighbors. So if you are Indigenous here in this circle, we invite you to name your people or tribal nation in the chat now as well, so that we may see you more fully in this online space. Thank you. We understand the importance and necessity of acknowledging the land and its original Indigenous peoples, and doing so consistently whenever and wherever we might gather, online or in person. Also, we understand that this protocol is only a first step, and that as we venture into the world, we must learn more, do more, and realize healing and justice for the Indigenous peoples whose lands we now occupy.
Sylvie. It's also important for us to offer a labor acknowledgement. In the words of Dr. Tara T.J. Stewart, Assistant Professor of Higher Education and Student Affairs at Iowa State University, if we cannot collectively begin to acknowledge the historical labor that has allowed our society to get and be where it is today, then we will continue to struggle to reconcile and redress those histories and legacies. We must acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development throughout history and across time, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their ascendants, who suffered the horror of the transatlantic trafficking of their people, slavery, and Jim Crow laws. We are indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we must acknowledge the tremors of that violence throughout the generations and the resulting impact that can still be felt and witnessed today. So let us begin our work by entering into a place of peace and listening together. Through these regular gatherings, we've developed a covenant of how we enter and interact in this space. We are committed to creating a safer and braver space where each of us are able to bring the truth of who we are and how we are doing. We ask you to honor confidentiality for everything shared in the breakout rooms. And if you share something in the larger space you wish for us to edit out of the recording, just let me know afterwards. And with all of this said, we affirm these conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ, the beloved community. So one note about today's session, Sylvia and I felt led to provide some intentional setup for this year's reading circle. So we'll be talking a little more today than in future gatherings.
Thank you for noting that. So today and every second Wednesday of 2025, we will journey with Indigenous author Vine Deloria Jr. and engage with Custer Died for Your Sins, an Indian Manifesto. So I just want to name an important distinction for this time as we begin this journey. Jason and I are really seeing that we are all learning from this Indigenous elder through his writing. So Jason and I are not teaching. We are all learning together. We're just facilitating this space each month, and we're learning from this elder among us. And just a quote to continue to deepen the context of our time together in shaping this space. A quote from the last paragraph of the preface. Vine Deloria Jr. states this: but the Indian task of keeping an informed public available to assist the tribes in their efforts to survive is never ending. And so the central message of this book, that Indians are alive, have certain dreams of their own, and are being overrun by the ignorance and the mistaken, misdirected efforts of those who would help them, can never be repeated too often. And so as we begin today, let's center ourselves with some reflections.
From Audre Lorde, the true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations which we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us.
By Cole Arthur Riley, to be truly liberated, we must confront the parts of ourselves that are in a hidden alliance with the systems that seek to destroy us.
One more from Bayard Rustin. The only way to reduce ugliness in the world is to reduce it in yourself.
So we invite each of us to take a breath together. As we inhale, let's affirm, I pay attention. And exhale, the revolution is within.
And we invite you into one more. Inhale, I examine my own soul. And exhale, I decolonize my interior. Now let's take a few minutes to continue to locate ourselves. We hope you already acknowledged in the chat the Indigenous land you currently occupy. If your Zoom window does not show the name you wish to be called in this space, we ask that you update that now. We each carry with us a number of communities, ancestors, and identities with which we identify. So we'd like for you to consider two questions, which I will also put in the chat. Which one community, ancestor, or identity would you like to share with this circle? And what drew you to this space today? Now, before you respond, I'm going to invite you first to take another breath. A reminder that we're not performing here. What are your authentic answers you might want to share in community? Due to our time constraint in this space and to honor our commitments on each other, we ask you be brief, maybe take up to a minute, maybe not much more if you speak aloud, and you can also do this in the chat. So those questions again, which one community, ancestor, or identity would you like to share with this circle? And what drew you to this space today? And feel free to just unmute or share in the chat.
I can begin speaking. I bring my Norwegian ancestry today and my ancestors, especially the spirit of my father, who recently passed. And I'm here because I've been following a thread for a very long time now, in terms of deepening my understanding, relationship, and work life on behalf of and in partnership with my Indigenous siblings.
Thank you, Sylvie.
I'll go.
Thank you, Jen.
I'm mostly Eastern European, but I was really fascinated in the book. There was the story of having that ancestor, particularly female. And the story in our family was that my grandfather's great great grandmother was stolen off the Trail of Tears, but we have no tribe for that, and there's no DNA anywhere that would suggest that to be true. So it's really fascinating to me. But I long to learn more and continue the efforts to decolonize our interiors and our exteriors.
Amen. Thank you, Joe. Seeing several in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, Persida.
I'd like to name that I put Boricua, meaning that I'm from the island of Puerto Rico, where my ancestors are from, and my culture is Taino, African, and Spanish. Spaniards, the Spaniards came and conquered Puerto Rico and, almost got rid of the Tainos and brought the Africans to Puerto Rico as slaves. So that is my history.
Thank you.
Mm.
I have heritage of a lot of European, Western and Northern European ancestry. I have a interesting story that has not been verified, but it was a deathbed confession of an ancestor that my family changed their name when they came to the New World because they moved to New York in the early 1900s. And this ancestor said that they were Jewish and had a Jewish name and needed to change their name. I have no verification of that yet, but I kind of hold on to a little bit of my potential Jewish history.
Thank you, Stephanie. And just for the sake of time, please feel free to keep sharing in the chat, but I'm going to invite Solveig back into the space.
Okay, to continue,
Mhm.
Jason? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Please do continue to share in the chat briefly about why you're here and who you're bringing with you. And we wanted to say a few more words about how we want to engage in this space here today. And so Jason is going to share a slide with elements of a covenant as a place to start, to help sort of shape the how we will be together, because the how matters to the what. So let's say what a few more words about these. We are going to invite you to share from your head and your heart. And actually the phrase that I like to use is heart-centered thinking, so that it's really a both and, it's not an either or. And there are a lot of reasons to do that, but just in this space particularly, just to remind us that, you know, every idea we talk about from the book, every event, every policy, every, you know, thing that could maybe get us into kind of our heads, thinking about, you know, different dynamics and whatnot, every one of those things that we'll talk about and that we will discuss has impacted and continues to impact the bodies, the lives, the communities, the futures of Indigenous peoples in real and traumatic ways. So we're never talking about just an idea when we're talking about this stuff. So that's why we want to engage with our heads and our hearts always. So thank you for helping us do that. Practice awareness of space and time. So as we're creating beloved community in this weekly gathering, we just invite you to notice the space that you occupy and the time, especially when you're sharing aloud. So just invite you to really be aware of that and keep sharing to, you know, a couple of minutes for the most part, so that everyone has a chance to share. As facilitators, it's possible we may interrupt from time to time and invite you to finish up what you are saying. This does not diminish the value of you or what you're sharing, but it is part of our practice of making sure there is space for everyone. And I also, in my own learning, I'm experiencing the tension or the both and, being in Indigenous or more Native spaces where interrupting is like not a thing, especially if an elder is speaking. Like, no, because it's honoring, because, you know, it's like, am I thinking that what I have to say is more important than what this person is saying? Right. And so, and yet, as for especially those of us who are shaped purely by dominant culture, we are taught to take up all the space and to not be aware of other people. And so, and yet there's also like gendered pieces where often, you know, for those of us who have identified as female, right, we also are taught in many ways to defer to the male-bodied persons among us. So anyway, it's complicated, but we're just inviting us to use this time as a time to grow, for all of us to grow in deeper self-awareness and other awareness around space and time. So also there's personality. So if you know that you are a person that like is an extrovert and you're ready to jump in, consider stepping back a little bit and making some space. And if you're a person that usually hangs back, right, we invite you to step up and challenge yourself that way. So this will be a dynamic process. And I'm really looking forward to growing with you all in that way. Which leads to the final part of our covenant, at least right now as a starting point, is that we are always learning. And that is the point. And so we really want to normalize the process of learning, the process of, making mistakes, maybe not even like saying that that's a mistake. It's an opportunity to learn and to see ourselves, right? And to keep going and to be in this together. So lots of grace. This is not a confidential space. This is being recorded. And so we get to learn in public, right? And beautiful, because we're doing it together. Now, just to remind you that you can always ask Jason to delete something before the recording gets posted. But I think it's a beautiful edge for us to grow on. It's just to be human and learning together in public. So I want to ask, how does this feel as a starting place for a covenant for our time together? I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. We can also, if you've got some feedback about that, you can share that with us anytime in the chat or emailing afterwards. Is there a way for people to contact you, Jason? Is that the point person? Yep.
That's a great idea. I'll put that email in the chat.
Great, thank you. But as a place to start, and then we'll grow from here. One more thing, and then we're gonna get into the first chapter, or preface and first chapter, I guess. And just one more note about kind of the pedagogy, meaning what are we going to be doing here? How are we going to hold this space? As we mentioned, we are not going to be talking this much at the beginning. So just to give yourself that relief, this is not going to happen every single time. But what we're thinking about is the kind of the intention with the pedagogy that I'll be sharing some pieces about is to inspire our agency, to really, and inspire engagement and inspire connection and learning. So what does that mean? How does that look? So we're, at least initially, what we're going to do is we're going to invite us, and we'll do this in just a few minutes. We're going to give about 5 minutes at the beginning of the time. And we're going to invite you to put in the chat what rises to the top for you of what you noticed, what you wondered about, what got you really agitated, or what invitation to growth came through the readings, came through the wisdom of this elder that we're reading. And so that could look like you just type in a quote, and please put the page number on that too, of like a phrase that really like gotcha in some deep way, really agitational, type an idea that you are wondering about, like you don't get, but you just can't stop thinking about, whatever it is. So we're going to have some quiet time at the beginning for you to put in the chat what it is, so that we all can see what everyone's bringing. And then from there, we can see, maybe, what are we noticing? Are there some themes? Are there some sort of strong commonalities? And then we'll generate the conversation from there. Not today, but in further sessions, we'll also be using some small group time, so that we can have a little more time to share more deeply and to make some connections with you all. So it's not just a big group all the time. And we also encourage, if there's something that somebody puts in the chat that you are really like, oh yes, I totally wondered about that too, send them a direct message in the chat and connect up. Say, hey, can we have a conversation at some other point? And so, because those connections matter, that's how we transform together. And then finally, at the end of our times, we'll be inviting us to reflect on our experience. So we'll be asking, what was a powerful learning for you today? And that could be from the content that we talked about. It could be from the process. A powerful learning could be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was going on for like 5 minutes, right? Like I was totally unaware of that, right? Or whatever it might be, content, process, anything. What was a powerful learning for you today? And then at the end, we'll have some invitations for you to engage what's happening now for Indigenous tribes and communities and nations, nationally, locally, even internationally, if you're so moved. So, gonna open up just for a couple minutes. If there's any like question that's bubbling up to the top for you that would help for clarification, or anything that you'd like to ask before we dive into the first reading. Ready to roll? Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, there's always time for questions. You can put any questions in the chat anytime. And so again, thank you. We won't be talking this much, but thank you for walking with us through this setting up of our time together, and just for being here. Look at this beautiful crowd. Love this. Love that we're all here to engage and learn and grow together. So as I mentioned, we're gonna give about 5 minutes, and I invite you to populate the chat. Put in the chat the things that you underlined. And again, if you're an underliner like me, there's no possible way you could put everything that you underlined in the chat. So put the things that you have underlined and starred and written notes about. Or whatever it is you want to do, whatever it is that you would like to bring to this space. And then we'll see what emerges, and we'll see where the spirit leads us in conversation.
While people are still adding notes, Solveig, is now a good time for me to start reading these aloud just to capture in the recording. We were thinking about accessibility for those who watched the recording. I got several emails from people who couldn't make it today, but wanted to make it possibly in future months. So we were trying to think about how do we make this right fully accessible to everyone. So I'm going to try to read through these pretty quickly aloud so they're in the recording. But please continue to add as you feel led. I was struck by the last sentence of chapter 1, page 27. What we need is a cultural leave us alone agreement in spirit and in fact. I noticed and was agitated by all the catch-22s that Indigenous peoples face. Examples, being told they need civilized clothing and then being ridiculed for wearing it, from page 10. From the preface, Indians are alive, being overrun by the ignorance and mistaken, misdirected efforts of those who would help them. What caught my attention was the task force report, efforting for change that would never have the needed funding. The different ways that land was apportioned out in the different states and regions of the US, particularly how differently the Nevada tribes were treated, from page 25. Many notes. What I wanted to and received was a starting point. I wanted, I think maybe real reality. I wanted history and background. I wanted the bias to glare. I started my journey with this chapter. From page 27, we need the public at large to drop the myths, need fewer and fewer experts on Indians. From page 12, true democracy was more prevalent among Indian tribes in pre-Columbian days than it has been since. Can I amen that one? For me, it was the reminder of the spectacular and ever continued way we have systematically failed to live up to our commitments, which were less than human to begin with. The image of wild animals versus kept beasts, a burden, was also striking and devastating. From page 11, talking about the origin of Indians, the Western Hemisphere, and what it taught them about simplicity and mystery compared to European experience of a post-Roman atmosphere that contain a lot of abstract and scientific ideas and perspectives. Specifically, I've been thinking about the European sense of owning property, of how status is tied to property, how power and privilege are tied to property, including money, and how all that shapes the white values. It seems the attitudes of the general populace of the US have not changed much. We want to dismiss Indigenous peoples, say they aren't here, or they're still here, or if they're still here, they should not get special rights like healthcare, etc., even though the US government has not followed through with what we promised. Example, give us your land and we will not give you what we promised. Sovereignty, healthcare, food, education, respect. Yes, on leave us alone agreement. Last paragraph on page 27, quote, bleach us further. The amount of attention getting Indians to conform to white American ways. From page 12, Indians are probably invisible because of the tremendous amount of misinformation about them. It's startling how much we have created an alternate reality about who our native siblings were and are, and yet those in power have always done this. And his biting humor leapt out at me, among other things. Thank you all. Wow. Chapter 1. We'll see you in a month. Just kidding. So what's rising for folks maybe from this, or shining from you, for you from this?
I'd like to, though I didn't read the chapter because I haven't gotten my book yet, but there was a comment or something that was said about having the Indian people conform to the white culture. And that is something that I can relate to as a Puerto Rican who is a US citizen, but my rhythms and my way of being is different than my white American citizens. And so therefore, when I do things, it's looked at as being incorrect or not appropriate because it's not the way white people do things. So growing up, coming from Puerto Rico as a little girl at 8, I did things differently. And so I had to stifle sometimes my spirit to be able to conform to the way the little white girls did things. And so as I got older, I've realized that I've been able to express myself in my authentic self, but it was a learning and a trial to get there. So that was something that I could relate to, even though I didn't read the book as a person of color.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Mhm.
Reading this, at least the beginning, made me think of also reading the book Caste, which is from a different perspective, but the similar kind of piece. And it just reminds me again, even though I have tried to educate myself, how much I don't know and how much has been misfed to me from the time I was a child, even though my dad was ahead of the curve. I mean, he was always making us read and teach, but still he didn't know, so he couldn't either. And it's just a reminder of all of that.
Thank you, Shirley.
If my can you hear me?
We
Okay,
can.
good. My microphone is working. Praise the Lord. I am struck for myself at the way my faith is growing as I am led into this work. So many layers of my theology were imposed by white thinking. And so to keep stripping that away, as well as just the deep work of facing fear and what it means to not stand with the culture, a whole series of things. And so for me, part of the central reason to do this is what it is doing for my faith. And I think that's also what's going to power whatever comes out of this for me.
Mm. Mm.
Thank you, Jane.
What keeps coming out for me is the fact that a 65-year-old book is still so totally relevant to today.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Alice. I noticed that a number of people, at least 3 people, responded to the piece about that quote about true democracy was more prevalent among Indian tribes in pre-Columbian days than it has been since. Just wondering if anyone wants to share a deeper sharing about that, the impact of that realization. What does that mean for us?
While y'all are thinking about that, I'm going to read the comment from the chat. I want to, again, think about the people who are catching the recording. Agree that it's noteworthy that a book originally published in 1969 is still considered a classic. I wonder what young millennial Native Americans are writing about their culture and what they think and say about this book.
Well, I think it's striking, and some of you may not know this, that that the suggestion, the recommendation to read this book came out of the ELCA Indigenous Ministries and Tribal Relations office, I guess, Vance Blackfox, the director, which is powerful, because in his estimation, reading this book right now is critical.
Mhm.
So I think that's very telling in and of itself.
So it just jumping on that piece, it's not only telling, it gives me a little bit of hope. I mean, in the sense of this is part of our church that's saying we need to be doing this. And I want to be part of a church that says that. And that leads the way in educating me and helping me to grow, helping, like Jane, you said, the faith to grow and stretch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and some of this for me is informed by just other reading about Indigenous perspectives. And part of what I sense is a deep commitment to the common welfare, to the tribe, to the point even that one's own life doesn't matter as much as continuing the tribe, the tradition. And I think about how different white Western individualism is, and our effort to extend ourselves, the way we take up space literally, figuratively, all the oxygen in the room and the universe. Um, and just what a challenge it is to fight that because of the way we were raised. And yet I also hear the call of Jesus being much, much, much more aligned with the common good than the white kind of advancing oneself. And yet it's hard in this culture for the church to raise that message up very far. We managed to shape it so it's comfortable for us. Yeah.
I think building on that too, I'm a realist, but it just feels like there's so many places lately that what I'm really doing is unforming and having to go back and say, where did I get that idea? Or who taught me that? Or how did I land in this place? Here's where I was. How did I end up here? So disappointment a lot in the church as just a whole. And so also looking to become more informed and to unform in some of my thinking so that in fact I can lean into that hope and can believe that we can make a difference. But we can't live in a fairy tale, oh, let's just hope it changes. It has to come with actions, and I'm a firm believer in that starts with education and awareness. But how do we unform some of those ideas that are planted in us from lots of different sources? And how do we face reality? I'm in Nebraska and we have a boarding school not far from my house. I mean, was a boarding school, and we're just pretending like it doesn't exist. It's like the town doesn't want to talk about it, and so we as the church aren't going to talk about it. So trying to navigate those paths and put them together in a way that helps me move forward in a constructive way. Grounded in faith.
Yeah, thank you, Sunny. I want to share. We haven't really shared this like aloud necessarily. I hope Jill won't mind me doing this from like the Creating Beloved community, as we've been sort of like noodling on this idea of a spirit for a little while, and several people. The terms that keep coming up to us are unlearning. So going to what you said, Sunny, and reformation. So like maybe it's time for another one, like we're way past the other one, or maybe long overdue for us. Jill, did I see you on mute?
Yeah, I put in the chat what I wanted to say, but I just wanted to amplify the fact that Vance was the one that really recommended reading this book to us. And I wanted to own how long I have struggled to understand more fully the intentionality about naming that movement the truth and healing movement. And if Vance would be a gazillionaire if he could have a dollar bill for every time he's had to explain to me why understanding, embracing, and owning the truth has to come before the healing. Being a fixer by nature, I just want to jump right to the healing. Like you just name it. Like, what kind of Band-Aid can I bring? I'll bring 20. And I think that I give Vance a headache just by stepping into the room, because he's like, we have to unlearn a lot, right? And the flip of that is, friends, the more I study this, and I've heard all of you say this, it's opening just this new horizon of how to be as an individual and lean into the organic connectedness that's always been there, but my whiteness has just covered it up. This is such a gift, and I thank you all for being participants in this.
You said Vance suggested it, but for me, it was LSTC. They had a panel on it. And, you know, for those of us who have any connection with it, they invited us to do that. So I was glad to see that was part of what LSTC was doing as well.
Hi. Sorry, my picture is not up there. So on page 20, I think people mentioned this, 26, Deloria talks about a change in congressional policy away from termination towards supportive tribal self-sufficiency. It is conceivable Indian tribes will be able to become economically independent of the federal government in the next generation, which has not happened. I was the one that said something about we hadn't kept our promises. It's kind of like we're going to take your land, but not give you anything that we said we would. And just to say that you read the thing, but the special rights was in quotes. So so I'm struggling with church and otherwise with trying to figure out how to be helpful without being helpful in a bad way. And retired pastor and college faculty and writer. And so I have this stuff I have these skills I want to offer and haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. I've made some forays into some things and made some connections with people, particularly artists, but just, and I read a lot. The second time I read his book, I probably read 5 of his books. I read voraciously. And there's lots and lots out there. What's that guy's name? Mark Charles, Reformed Church of America, has some good theological writing.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, believe it or not, like we're actually having to move toward closing at this point. Even though we're 10 minutes till, we have some pieces to kind of move ourselves toward closing. But again, next time we're going to have this time of conversation is going to be longer. So we'll get into just a little bit of logistics in just a minute. But we wanted to just give each person a chance to say in a word or a phrase or one sentence, what was a powerful learning or insight for you today? It might be something that came from the chat. It might be just something somebody said. If you don't have one, that's fine. We're just taking the first step together. So that's beautiful too. So we'll just do a popcorn. You can also put it in the chat. So if you want to say it out loud, feel free to just unmute yourselves. We'll give a few minutes for this, or if you can put that in the chat, you're welcome to do that. But what was a powerful learning for you today? Content, process, anything.
I'll start with I am reminded that there are a bunch of beautiful people. So I'm looking at each of you, including those whose faces are not on the screens, who are willing to do the work when I came into this with not much hope. So thank you all for being here and doing this with us.
I'll name that when you check you populated the chat with the things that had jumped out to you, that was like, it was like all over the map. And I thought that there might be some, you know, some common themes, some strong things that came through, and lots of them, which there were in a certain extent. And yet my learning, my just remembering is like, oh my gosh, guess what? We all see things from a different perspective. And what I see what I see. And I have to be in community, because otherwise I don't see what you see. So thank you for putting in the chat. Thank you for sharing what you've shared. So, so grateful for that.
What I got from this gathering today is the importance of learning from one another, and reaching out in ways to understand other people's cultures and ways of being, because that's how we can become more universal in our way of being human with one another. You know, because then we could see the common good, I think, when we're able to express ourselves and be authentically who we are, you know.
For me, the willingness and the openness to learn, to unlearn, and to just bring awareness, having that conversation. So I just want to thank Jill and Jason and the ELCA coaching for providing this opportunity.
Yeah. And I think it's only in being in a group that does push us and care for us yet, even while we're getting pushed, can we go then back out. I've always lived in urban areas like Detroit and Chicago and New York, and I'm now living in Arizona. And, you know, just being with all of you again strengthens us, strengthens me, so that I can be authentic in a world where a world I'm not used to, I'll say. I mean, in the sense of, you know, politically and all of those different ways. And yet, I have to tell you one thing. I found a small parish, and there aren't many Lutheran parishes in Arizona. She talked about the boarding houses as a children's sermon in, I can't remember what month, October, when they were, you know, that history, but that's what the pastor did there. And I thought, okay.
Beautiful. I'm going to invite anybody else to just please put your learnings in the chat. And because we've got just a couple more things to close us out with. And again, so grateful to be in this together. A couple of just quick logistics. As we've mentioned, these are recorded. And so they'll be available on the coaching website. And so if you would like to, you know, listen to it again, or if you would like to invite somebody to join us, we just ask that they just watch this recording so that they're not entering in just like with no context. We'd really like them to have the context and the covenant and everything. So please do that. And if you miss a session, watch the recording and then jump back in. Okay. Again, we're going to read one chapter a month. So next month we'll read chapter 2. Again, noticings and wonderings, agitations and invitations to growth. Just now you have that framework, so you can note that while you're reading. And we're going to invite you to engage with 1 or 2 new websites for you, or get on a mailing list or 2, because Find Deloria is describing, you know, the state of Indian affairs 40 plus, 60 plus years ago. What is the state of Indian affairs now? So Jason is going to put a link in the chat, and where you'll be able to just look at a bunch of possibilities I recently just got on a couple of email lists, thanks to Jason for some links that he shared with me. So let's learn together. And then finally, we just invite you to bring this question to your prayer. What do I need? Asking God, Spirit, Creator, ancestors, what do I need to remember to help us on this journey together? What do I need to remember? Because we all have it. Like we all have deep wisdom that we're not conscious of, right? So what do I need to remember to continue on this journey? And I'm going to invite Jason to close us out.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvie. So one technicality, the web link I included is for the recording. I aim to post it by the next business day. And that's also when I'll have the newsletter links for you to consider, one or two. Some of them are daily, some are weekly, some are monthly, but they are like what's going on in Indian country now. Like you'll get notices of like lawsuits or so I just learned yesterday on Instagram, for example, the Federated Tribes of Great and Rancheria regained stewardship of 466 acres of their ancestral lands along the coast. So things like that, and you can read for more information. But you know what's going on in your area, in your own locale. So we're like right at time, just like 1 minute more, I think. Thank you for helping us to create beloved community today. It would not have been the same without you. Next week, we actually want to invite you to 2 online events. On Tuesday, I'm going to put these in the chat as well. Please join us for the National Day of Racial Healing. And on Wednesday, please join us back in this space for Creating Beloved Community, Nobody Journeys Alone, facilitated by Jen Kunka and Reverend Carlton Rogers. As you leave here today, please remember that you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.